Yes, thank you everyone. And it was, the reason I got in contact with Kathleen so early was because we were, as part of this project that I'll tell you about, Carbo Fertil, we're planning to do a field trial, a field study, or a study tour. We wanted to come to Europe and find out what everyone's doing. And when Kathleen sent around that there was going to be a study tour, I jumped right on it because as I've now experienced, I never would have been able to pull off such a wonderful study tour, which we're currently having, and meeting all these wonderful people and networking opportunities and finding out all the information we're finding out. So I'm grateful that we're able to be part of this, and I'm grateful that so many Norwegians were able to come along on the journey and learn all this great information. As you can probably hear, I'm not Norwegian. From down under, and now I'm up over, as I'll call it. Unfortunately, we're not getting enough soil scientist recruits from the local Norwegians, so we get a lot of imports, such as myself, taking soil science jobs. But anyway, they'll have to put up with me for a while. Norway, I've become one of now the 5.2 million inhabitants. So it's even smaller than Austria in terms of population, but it's a very long country, so it spans great climate differences from temperate in the south to polar, past the polar circle. And a few fun facts: about 37% forested. You've got about 30% mountainous wilderness areas. Called Utmark in Norwegian, in the second picture, and only 3% agricultural area, cultivated soils, of which 2/3 of those are grasslands. So that gives you, from an agricultural perspective, there's many more facts, but from an agricultural perspective, that's what we're looking at with Norway. If it was a Norwegian here, he'd be telling you all about how good they're at skiing, but I won't go into that. Norway's climate goals. Norway has some very ambitious climate goals. They'd like to be carbon neutral by 2050 and have an ambitious goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% by 2030. Unfortunately, I checked on the climateactiontracker.org, which is a credible website run by independent researchers and groups, some mainly funded by German ministries. Currently, the track record is that we're projected to decrease emissions by only 6% of those 1990 levels by 2030 if we continue on the same trajectory as we are today. So we want to hit 40%. If we don't make drastic changes, we probably won't get any more than 6%. Which means, what are the implications of that? It means if everyone performs as badly as we're projected to perform, we're headed towards 3 to 4 degree global temperature increases. So if we all don't pull our weight collectively, the collective trajectory is not good, unfortunately. Already, this is statistics collected. This is from the Norwegian public government website. Mean temperatures in Norway, at least since the 1980s, on average increasing. We've already hit up towards 1.5 degrees. So, as you might have heard in the media, the effects of climate change are more. It affects the southern and northern climates much more drastically. The closer you go towards the poles, the more drastic the temperature changes are. And that's why we're seeing drastic ice level changes in both the Antarctic and the Arctic. Moving on to emission levels in Norwegian agriculture. What this graph doesn't tell you is that the number one emission post is the mineralization of carbon from organic soils, which is also one of the major carbon sources in the northern hemisphere in organic soils and peatlands in Russia, for example. But of just cultivated soils and agriculture and animal husbandry, the two major coasts of nitrous oxide emissions and methane, have been holding themselves pretty steady since 1990 until today. So N2O on the top and methane on the bottom, due to the biological processes that control natural systems, it's not so easy in agriculture to reduce emissions. And if we were to project this towards 2030, if we were to do the same things we've been doing the last 25 years, you could probably expect it to go here. With population increases, it might even increase. But if we do make drastic action, it could also decrease. This is what needs to happen. But in order for this to happen, something has to change. That's why you hear, and we're all here today talking about really solutions for climate, talking about humus, we're talking about soil carbon, talking about biochar. And you've heard about this 4 per miller initiative, the French initiative, which was launched in the 2015 Paris meeting. So in Norway, the number one thing you could do, because we have very small agricultural areas, we don't have mass land areas where we can store carbon in soils, but we could protect organic soils, which are the major carbon source. Unfortunately, it is also in some areas the case that they only have organic soils. So in those areas, do you stop farming altogether? What do you tell the local people? Where do you grow the food? This has implications for food production. It's implications for rural livelihoods, and it's a very contentious issue. One of the 4 per miller suggestions is also to minimise the carbon loss by reduced tillage and improved practices in agriculture, reduced ploughing, cover crops. This is highly meritorious. It has good benefits for the soil. There has been studies to show in temperate climates that it might not have so much effect when you look at the depths of carbon, both at the top level and deeper down. Studies comparing no-till versus conventional tillage don't show that much difference in meta-analyses. And often the reduced tillage practices will work better in drier climates where you get more benefits from retaining moisture, but in high precipitation climates like Norway, it has lesser effects. We can also increase carbon by putting it in the soil, and I've been very inspired by Gerald's examples and what they're doing here in Austria. So definitely we can do more to put carbon in soil. Working closely with Biochar, who you've probably met already, he's been doing some great work with composting, and he works on a gravelly, sandy soil, a moraine soil, left over from the last ice age when the glaciers were grinding rocks over the fjords of Norway, and you're left with this stony, gravelly sand. It's beautiful for growing vegetables in because it's easy to drain, but it doesn't have a lot of organic matter in it. So Björg's been doing some great work in bringing some of these soils back to life. And biochar. We're here to talk about biochar. This is the other option that we can talk about in towards this 4 per miller initiative. And this is basically increasing the residency time of the carbon in the soil. The early days with biochar, there was this talk about locking biochar up and stabilising carbon in soil, and it's now known that also biochar doesn't last forever. It's not diamonds. It is degradable. There's fungal groups that can degrade it. It's more likely to degrade in forest soils, and it's more likely to be protected in clay soils, where it can be protected from various microbes or fungal microbes and such. But in general, it lasts a lot longer. So we're talking about how much time it can stay there compared to other forms of carbon. And very early on in Norway, biochar was recognised officially in official government reports as being a very promising strategy to improve the greenhouse gas balance in Norwegian agriculture. The green, but you can't read what these other strategies are. Some of them are biogas, some of them are doing things with manure, ploughing initiatives. But the big green bar is biochar, which stands right out above all other things you could do in agriculture. And you may be wondering, why is it that much more than anything else you could do? And what a lot of people forget to realise is that when we're talking about carbon, we're talking about the carbon cycle. We've been so focused on reducing emissions that we forgot that the carbon cycle is also about uptaking carbon. You know, there's two sides of the balance sheet. For all the business people in the room, you're acutely aware that there's always two sides to a balance sheet, to an accounting. Okay, if you want to increase profitability, you can talk about reducing costs and cutting down, laying off workers, or you can also focus on investing, increasing revenues, increasing profits. And I like to think of carbon a little bit like a business balance sheet. And I think this is also one way we can communicate carbon to people. It's a very easy way for people to understand about cutting down on expenses is cutting down on emissions. Building carbon up is like building assets or putting money in the bank, putting money in the soil. And I'm very optimistic that although we have almost, I could probably say, zero pyrolysis plants in operation as of this date, although we have one demonstration plant at Biochar currently awaiting repair, but I'm very optimistic that we could go from zero to hero in Norway quite quickly, and I'm going to give you a number of reasons why. We do have an excess of biomass in Norway. As I said, we have a lot of forests. We also have a lot of excess straw, which isn't used that much. But we do have a lot of forests, we have a lot of residues, we have a lot of timber industry, which could be used. When I first started, since I got into biochar and thought about this idea of capturing carbon, I was telling Kathleen this on the bus, that you start to see opportunities everywhere to capture carbon. You start to see, the edges of highway which aren't planted. You start to see opportunities where you could grow a tree. What about there? What about there? What about there? Why don't we put something here? Why don't we do this layer and another layer over the top and another layer over the top? We could be capturing carbon all over the place. So even of the biomass which is officially recorded, it's probably not the whole story. There's probably lots more biomass that we could deal with. So if someone tells you, oh, but what about all the competing biomass? Everyone's the biomass and everyone's competing for it and there'll be none left for the biochar. Well, I think if we actually really put some mental energy into this, we'd find much more opportunities to both grow more carbon and find enough carbon to do everything you want to do with it. Another reason biochar is highly suited in Norway is that it's a landscape, a little bit to Austria, where farmers are also foresters, where farmers are often on the edges of forests, they own forests, they cut wood, they have access to feedstocks, and it's close to where they need the heat. They've got barns, they've got animal housing, there's villages, there's schools. So the distance from feedstock to the place where you need the heat and where you can produce the biochar is quite close. And we do need the heat. It's a cold country. Unlike Australia, you have a little bit more difficulty in using the heat. You have to make electricity and such. Norway, you can use simpler technologies. Biochar and heat is a suitable technology to roll out in Norway. And another interesting fact is that Norway is a highly subsidised agricultural country, highly controlled and sort of, you could say, cooperative arrangement between the farmers' community and the government, and there's a negotiation each year for subsidies, an agreement which has come to, which has just gone through now, where certain payment is made for production, for producing agricultural products, and certain requirements are met to receive those subsidies. And that's why when you cross the border from places like Sweden to Norway, And this, you know, for Australians or places used to broad-scale agriculture, you go to Norway, you won't believe the areas that are cultivated. There's a railway there, there's a road there, there's a little strip, you call it a footpath, and someone's planted wheat there. You go, who would bother driving the tractor there and planting the wheat? A Norwegian farmer would do it. Because you get paid for every square metre that you plant the crop. You're paid a subsidy per area. So it's important. You've got agricultural soil, plant it. And that also means is that a system is in place. So if carbon payments would come about, there's already an institutional framework to make it happen. And already today, farmers are paid for various activities in terms of the environment. For example, to improve water quality, they have tree buffers. In some watersheds, they pay farmers not to do autumn ploughing so that it's kept in stubble and you have less phosphorus runoff into the waterways, and they can do their ploughing in the spring. So there's various things that are already done. In fact, increasing carbon in soil is already officially accepted in the subsidy schemes. It's just there's nobody doing it because there's no protocol in place. And it'd be very difficult to prove that you actually, under current circumstances, that you've increased your carbon. But we'll get to that. And just from last year, there was a very generous subsidy program which was introduced by the Innovation Norway department, authority in Norway, which gives up to a 45% capital investment subsidy on combustion and pyrolysis plants. And the last one is a bit of a poke fun here at Biochar up the back there, but there's a very short distance between a good idea and the agriculture minister. That's the agriculture minister, by the way, on the right hand, and that's a person with a good idea on the left. So Norway, some say Norway's like a small town. Doesn't take too long to get to know everybody, and you probably, what are they, three, Norwegians get together and they say, do you know such and such? And they probably know someone who knows someone who knows someone and who went to school with you or something like that. So where are we now and where are we headed? As I said, we don't have much current investment in pyrolysis. I think we're on the verge of big things happening and I'm really optimistic. So far, we've done our best to be involved in the biochar research. We're part of the cost action in Europe. We're happy to be involved with that. We've been collaborating with some Claudia and Bruno and probably a couple of others in the room that I forgot to mention. But so we've been doing the tests. We've been doing field trials. We've been doing the pure biochar field trials as well, where you get no reduced, no yield effects. You do see some physical improvements, soil physical improvements. Increased water retention and such. But as others have also mentioned in this tour, you can put large amounts of it in and we didn't see any negative results on both yields or soil quality or soil health or earthworms. We looked at a lot of different things. So from a risk perspective, we can at least say to the government that there's not really any danger here of this particular approach. And of course, there's lots of different end-use applications applied. We're doing some applied research looking at replacing peat, for example, in garden soils or green roofs or other applications with biochar, and that seems to be having a good effect. In the last few years, we've been active in getting a pilot plant up on Bjørge's farm at Skjærgården in Vestfold County, which is a vegetable farm. Bjørge's involved growing mostly spring onions, one of the biggest spring onion producers in Norway. And this is an Australian reactor designed by Stephen Joseph, made by Russell Burnett, who came over and installed the machine. We have had some technical difficulties with it and we're hoping to get it, it's currently not working, but we're hoping to get it fixed and get it into operation and get up and running again, but we are doing field trials out on the farm this year, which I'll mention in a slide later. What I'll mention, with Kathy mentioned it before, that it brought to mind this idea that you went to the meat industry, or was it? The meat industry, and asked for support, and they didn't have any of it. And then when it happened in Canada, then they started getting interesting. And I see this time and time again that, you know, a prophet is never welcome in their own town, right? So we got a technology from Australia. We brought it to Norway. Okay, it didn't work perfectly, but there was a lot of attention around it. And this catalysed a lot of publicity. The agricultural minister came out and visited the property. Burgers getting calls 3 or 4 times a week, people asking about biochar. You know, there's something to be said about international collaboration, going outside your country and coming back. You know, I'm sure that now that there's quite a lot of Norwegians coming here today, they go back to Norway and it'll create a lot of momentum, because there's something to be said from getting advice from those outside your country. You know, it has a lot more input. We were having a joke last night in Australia. We're always looking up to the Europeans, you know, German engineering, Danish design, Danish kitchens, that sort of thing. I saw there was a great Australian ice creamery in Europe. But if you go to Australia, it's called the Danish ice creamery or something like that. So opposites attract. It holds well for international cooperation. And so people often ask me, because I've been doing this since 2009, I've been educating people about biochar, and the longer we go talking about biochar without taking off, people naturally get sceptical. If this is such a great idea, why isn't it taken off? Why aren't people doing it left, right and centre? And it's a reasonable question. But, you know, if you break it down, there's always reasons why things don't take off. I could mention a few. It's currently not approved. Like, biochar is currently not approved at international level. We're still working off the IPCC regulations from 2006. Fortunately, these IPCC regulations are under review, and I do believe biochar is mentioned in the new draft, so things are happening in that respect. Technology availability and process hasn't been so fast. You can't go down to your local shop and buy a process plant off the shelf, although that's changing. We're seeing more and more technologies out there today. But 5 or 10 years ago, even a few years ago, it really wasn't easy to get an idea of who was selling, how much did it cost, and to have a number of different varieties of technologies. It takes time to communicate new ideas. 5 or 10 years ago, no one knew anything about biochar in Norway. Today, it's a different story. A lot more people know, but there's still more work to be done. But these things snowball, and the more people understand it, it accelerates. And, you know, many people are here in the study tour looking for potential end markets for biochar. A lot of people are talking about this. I'm ready to invest. I'm interested in biochar. I want to do something with climate change, but I'm not quite ready. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to sell the biochar. What is the best markets? Where do I sell it? These things people are still trying to work out. It's still a little bit immature. So it does require risk. It requires a little bit of courage and a little bit of aversion to risk. Norway is a conservative country. There's a lot of countries that are a little bit more risk aversive. I would say Norway is in that category. A little less entrepreneurial culture than, for example, USA. They tell me that in the USA, when biochar first got started, people started printing the business cards first before they had the business plan or any technology to show for it. You know, whereas Norway and other northern European countries, things are done more more steady, and you get things and you prove things and you make sure of it before you jump right in. And this is probably the most important point, is that a lot of us have been down the road of doing biochar trials with pure biochar, and we've seen the results that, give or take 10% in temperate regions, or no effect. And there is a need, if we really want this to take off on a greater level, we need to get better agronomic results for farmers. We need to find better ways to make biochar work with different crops. So that's why in this new project, which we've been lucky to get financing for, the Carbo Fertil project, we're hoping to tackle the biochar issue from many different angles, from a complete approach. We're looking at both pyrolysis. We have Sintef Liang Wang up the back there, is leading the work on pyrolysis and creating customized biochars which have more ability to retain nutrients, which are specified for specific nutrient-rich feedstocks, can be produced. It will be produced at lab scale, but it will be looking more at the fundamental research on how to create good biochars. We have Alice Badai, who just gave a talk, who will be leading the work package on creating these biochar-based fertilizers. And we have some good collaboration from Stephen Joseph, University of New South Wales, Technical University in Munich. We have Ingrid, who many of you probably know personally, using the NanoSims microscope, which is probably Europe's most powerful microscope, which can look at the distribution of nitrogen and phosphorus, for example, on the surface of biochar at a visit. I mean, you could see it visibly in microscopic pictures. That's how powerful the microscopes are getting now. And we have INRA involved as well, which are doing labeled nitrogen experiments. We also, if I continue on here, so we have the pyrolysis I've mentioned. We have Alice leading up the work with biochar-based fertilizers. The photo I mentioned here, this was taken a couple of weeks ago at Björger's farm from another project led by Alice called Carbon Vext, where we're trying to find good combinations of anaerobic digestate from biogas and biochar, similar to what Gerald was mentioning. And the reason I asked the question, do you acidify the biochar, or is it pH regulated? Because I was also mixing the biochar with the digestate, and there is a need to some sort of pH regulation with these, because you do lose ammonia quite quickly in these when you mix a high pH biochar with quite a high pH digestate. So this, I think, is very interesting, this approach of fermentation, lacto fermentation, and it's one we'd like to also pursue. And we have NTNU, who are experts on LCA analysis, which are going to do a full climate impact analysis along the value chain to see what the end result with that would be. We have economists involved to look at what this means for farmers and to what extent we need subsidies in place, carbon payments in place for this. Knut Skinnes, many of you is sitting up there in the white t-shirt. He's recently joined us as an intern, and he's working on policies, doing his master's on implementation of a subsidy scheme for carbon sequestration in Norway. And he's been instrumental in having some political meetings where educating politicians about biochar in Norway. And just recently, it was also taken up in the Norwegian Parliament, where one of the representatives asked the Environment Minister, what about biochar, what's being done, can you incentivize it? And just like, I think it's like the British Parliament, or Australian Parliament, question time. So when you ask a question, you're required a response. So that just the other day there came a written response which said it was a very positive thing, and where they mentioned that biochar was being included in the draft, these IPCC regulations. And the final part we're doing, and which I'm leading, is this multi-actor involvement. For the researchers in the room, you've probably been banging your head against the wall the last few years, all the times you've heard this word, multi-actor engagement, because this is a big thing now about getting financing in Europe and in Norway, is that it's not, you no longer get money to sit in your office and do fancy experiments. You have to engage the end users of your information throughout the whole life cycle of your project. And it's something I've really tried to do in this project, and also at this study group, is to bring many different people together who could potentially move the biochar industry ahead, specifically in Norway. Technology people, farming community, policy people, bureaucrats, researchers, and the researcher's role is basically sort of like an independent knowledge broker to be somewhat of a glue in this process, to be a go-to person, to be someone who's independent, which can be trusted on all sides, without giving away secrets or stealing people's ideas or things like that. So, you know, we're public servants in a way. We're paid by the government, we're paid by taxpayers' money to do research. So we should be trusted that we're not here for our own benefit, but we're here basically to move these things forward and to find out what works and what doesn't work. Okay, that's it, yep. So I'll just show a few nice pictures of some of, this is not the same project, but this is this other project, Carbon Vexed, and I'm really excited in the next few years we'll be able to find some good solutions for combining biochars and slurries together, and finding interesting ways to apply them to soil. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.
There's one remaining. This morning there was a discussion about aquaculture, and you mentioned that you have it in your project as well. Can you?
Not at this one, but of course, as a research organisation, we're always looking for the next project. So we do realise that after oil and gas in Norway, it's aquaculture, it's salmon farming. There's a lot of money in salmon farming. There's a massive publicly listed companies in Norway. Salmon farming for many years has been had quite a free license to do their operations and create jobs and create wealth in Norway without worrying too much about the environmental consequences, such as the release of unspent feed into the oceans, the sludging of the fjords with nutrients, the excess of nutrients which are released into the environment and such. These things are starting to be tightened around the aquaculture industry and will continue to be, and you see cases of land-based closed systems, full nutrient cycling. This is all coming down the road, and I think the major companies can see this happening as well. So there's quite a few commercial companies also. There's one company I know of in Norway, they're developing solutions for fish sludge pyrolysis. They're also a stakeholder in our project. And the fish industry are very interested. So both from there's applications for both treating fish sludge from freshwater hatcheries. It's a big one. That's probably the lowest hanging fruit because you're looking at freshwater sludge versus saltwater sludge, which you would have to do something with the salt. So that would be the first thing to do something with, and the second would be this inclusion of biochar into the feed and seeing if it had. There's also many health problems with fish, things like lice and other probably diseases. I'm not a fish health expert, but you do read about a lot of the problems. Anytime you put lots of animals into one space, whether it's cows or pigs or chickens or fish, you're going to get problems. You're going to get health problems. And this is also the case with fish. So we mentioned the idea. They almost went with it immediately. So we'll see where it goes.
Okay, we're gonna have to.
Can I have a cup?
Be quick. It's all quick. Huh? Well, we're 7 minutes past, so we're moving into. Yeah, maybe a little later. Thanks again, Adam.